You're listening to episode 10 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness researchers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Dr. Sam Himelstein joins us again to speak about his book, A Mindfulness-Based Approach to Working with High-Risk Adolescents. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are good that you've either found some benefit to a mindfulness practice or you know someone who has. It's also likely at this early stage of the socialization of mindfulness in the school systems that you may not have come to the practice as an adolescent. For many of us, meditation wasn't something we had to help us deal with the problems of growing up, especially the problems faced by at-risk youth. Sam Himelstein is the executive director of the Mind-Body Awareness Project. As an adolescent, Sam was heavily involved in the juvenile justice system and was incarcerated on several occasions over a period of 3 years. He eventually turned his life around through connections with mentors, personal inner work, including mindfulness meditation, and the never-ending love and support of his parents. Sam received his PhD from Sophia University, where he is now Associate Core Faculty, teaching classes on the incorporation of mindfulness into psychotherapy in Low Residency Master's Program. Sam completed the first published research for MBA entitled A Mixed Method Study of a Mindfulness-Based Intervention with Incarcerated Youth as his dissertation. He has been involved with MBA for over 5 years in many different positions, including MBA instructor, program manager, and director of research, and has dedicated his career to working with high-risk and incarcerated adolescents. His knowledge and love for his work have been compiled in his book, A Mindfulness-Based Approach to Working with High-Risk Adolescents, published in April of 2013. Our returning guest today is Dr. Sam Himelstein. Sam, welcome back. Nice to speak with you again.
Hey, Ted. It's great to be here.
We spoke with you in episode 2 about your role as Executive Director of Mind-Body Awareness Project based in California. Today, we're going to delve more deeply into your book, A Mindfulness-Based Approach to Working with High-Risk Adolescents. What was it that prompted you to write the book?
Well, when I was in graduate school, I read a lot of literature on different psychotherapeutic techniques. And there's a fair amount of literature on working with adolescents. And of course, over the last couple of decades, a fair amount of literature on mindfulness has been put out there. But since my passion was really mindfulness with adolescents and specifically with marginalized and underserved youth, mostly in the probation system, I really just wanted to synthesize that and bring the different concepts together for working with this very specific population. So I started writing, papers for class, and then I started publishing papers in journal articles. And I just thought that, it's really important to get this out there because there's a lot of people who either A, are really interested in working with probation-involved youth, and there's no literature out there to really guide them step by step on how to have these types of conversations with them, or B, people want more literature on mindfulness and specifically how mindfulness can be translated into psychotherapy. So that was really my motivation. I wanted to put something out there. I wanted to write to graduate students who are just starting internships, to beginning mental health professionals, and even to seasoned mental health professionals who are working with this very niche population, because there's not much out there that's written for us who work with them. There's a bunch of research out there, but there's not a lot of how to, there's not a lot of what do you say when this happens, or when this situation arises, how should we deal with it? That just coupled with my very strong passion for working with this population is really what motivated me to put the book together.
And it's interesting that you mention it covers a couple of different kinds of areas that are only addressed individually. We see some scientific research papers that are out there, but not collected. And we see how-to information in various spots, but not collected, and certainly not brought together in a single volume for this particular group of at-risk youth. So, Sam, how did you organize the book? What's the structure or the outline of it look like? Do you want to give us a tour of the chapters?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is broken down into 3 major parts. I titled them in the book Context, Content, and Skills. And basically just kind of like a bird's eye view looking at the table of contents. We go from more philosophical based content outward to more pragmatic. So in the beginning, we start with the context, and I present a mindfulness model of psychotherapy. And, there's a couple of books out right now, not too many, and more are coming out that present, full models on how to translate mindfulness into psychotherapy, not just teaching meditation, but the philosophy of mindfulness, the philosophy of the Four Noble Truths, or of suffering and compassion, and all these other elements that underlie mindfulness practice from various traditions. How do we incorporate that into working with young people, into working with clients? How does that influence our thinking when certain issues arise, and so forth? So in my first chapter, I'm just mainly talking about the model that I'm presenting, and I'm certainly not saying that I made up this model and I'm the only one that has a model like that. I'm drawing on various different concepts from the mindfulness literature, from the humanistic psychology literature, from the existential literature, and coming together with a model that works for me. And my goal is for somebody to read that and try to absorb as much as they can, and then translate it into their own model with their own critiques and their own method of doing it. So that's kind of how I start out. Like, this is my paradigm that I see how mindfulness translates into psychotherapy. And it's kind of like, in some research studies, you'll see at the beginning of the research article, at least in qualitative research, not so much in quantitative research, at the beginning of the research article, they'll present their paradigm. This is the paradigm that I'm working out of, so that you as the reader get a sense of where they're coming from and any potential biases they may have. So this first chapter was my attempt to do that, to contextualize where I was coming from. The next 3 chapters, also in part 1, in the context part, are titled Building an Authentic Relationship, Working with Resistance, and the Paradox of Change. These 3 chapters have been, I would say, if somebody was only going to read 3 chapters in this book, or only really 1 chapter in this book, to pick one of those chapters. Because when you're working with, this population with at-risk and marginalized young people who are dealing with oppression, dealing with poverty, dealing with the judicial system, building an authentic relationship is absolutely necessary. And I really go over in detail how I like to do that with young people. If you don't have an authentic relationship, most often the young person is not going to trust you. They're not going to be willing to get vulnerable with you. They're not going to be willing to listen to you, talk about this thing called mindfulness, or any curriculum for that matter, or any technique for that matter. So building an authentic relationship is really the base. And that's nothing new in the therapy world. There has been a lot of therapy traditions that really emphasize that not only building an authentic relationship is important, because then you have a vessel of a relationship where you can confront your client on important issues, but also that the relationship itself can be healing. So that's why I put, it's somewhat of a longer chapter in the book, and it's just one of the most important things in working with this population. And then the other two chapters, chapters 3 and 4, working with resistance, and chapter 4, the paradox of change, there's just so much out there in the research, at least on this population, kind of pointing the finger to them, talking about how they're treatment resistant. And what I found is if you build an authentic relationship with a young person, just like if you build an authentic relationship with anyone, they're most likely not going to be resistant. If you treat them like human beings, they'll talk to you. And a lot of times people go into these juvenile hall settings or probation settings or school settings, and the therapist will go in with this idea that, they need to change this young person and that this young person is going to be resistant to that change. Well, I kind of flip that whole philosophy over and say, in order to work with resistance, in order to work authentically with young people, it's not our place to tell them if and how they should change. And that really aligns with a mindfulness model of life because, in the practice, we learn that there's some things that we can control, and then there's some things that we can't control, and that we shouldn't try to control the things that we can't control. And with a young person, as much as we may want them to change, it's really up to them. So if I can't control it, I'm not going to try to force it. Ironically, and I go over this in the book too, ironically, when I view resistance as something that can be worked with, so therefore I don't try to avoid it. It's something that can arise and something that I can work with that could point towards more self-awareness and more growth. When I view resistance that way and when I don't try to force change, ironically, in my experience, the young person is more open to change.
Yeah, the resistance itself is an indication of something needing attention, and honoring that and giving it the attention with that sincere relationship you're talking about, that's the avenue for transformation.
That's absolutely right. A lot of people, and I train a lot of young therapists who want to avoid and eliminate resistance. And I tell them, no, that's the young person trying to protect themselves right there. That's the young person showing you that there's something underneath that's worth attention, that's worth awareness, and that's something you can build with. I mean, I'll tell you, there's just been so many times when the most resistant person in my group or the most resistant client that I've had turns out to be doing some of the deepest work, and becomes one of my best group members or one of my best clients. So in part 1, those 4 chapters, it's really setting up that context that there's something other than simply just teaching meditation that aligns heavily with a mindfulness model of psychotherapy. So that's how I break down that first part. The second part, which is titled Content, is a shorter part. It's only 2 chapters, Worldview and Spirituality, chapter 5, and chapter 6, Core Themes. That is more, just my experiences over the years of working with these young people, the types of content that has arisen, like the types of things we actually talk about. And I go through in that part the different types of worldview and spirituality issues that have come up. And a lot of people think, well, young people, they're not really thinking about spirituality. But a lot of the people that I've worked with, especially people who have been getting the short end of the stick and who are coming from oppressed communities, they're thinking about spirituality all of the time. So they're in a constant state of questioning their relationship with the world, their relationship with something that might be beyond the world. So there's so much to talk about there. And then in the next chapter, in what I titled Core Themes, I'm talking about a lot of just the actual things that they bring up in the session, like substance use, interpersonal conflicts with family, with friends, girlfriends, boyfriends, death. A lot of the young people that I work with, unfortunately, they deal with constant death in their lives. So I talk about how that often shifts the paradigm in how they relate to the world. And there's just so much there, within that content, of course, all the other things come up, the need to want to change or the therapist wanting to change them or resistance arising. So It's just kind of those sections are heavy in actual interactions that I've had with young people. I try to do that as much as I can in the book, but actual kind of like line by line transcripts of me talking with my client. And that's one of the things that I've been told, at least by my colleagues, that they really liked about the book, that there's actual dialogue in there. We're not talking about therapy or talking about a client. It's actual interaction, so that a beginning mental health professional or even a seasoned one can see, the client said this and then I said this, and we kind of go back and forth for a while, and then I give maybe a little summary about what my thinking was behind the interventions that I conducted.
So it's not always abstract. There's direct, tangible, practical, here's what we meant by that.
Yes, absolutely. Here's what we meant by that. There's actual transcript. All of the transcripts in the book are real situations from my interactions with clients. Of course, I changed the names for confidential purposes, but they're real here and now interactions of, a client said this in therapy, and I'm highlighting how to work with resistance or how to deal with somebody who's talking about an immense amount of pain and suffering. And this is what I said, and this is what they said. And it's a good guide, especially for a beginning mental health clinician, to just kind of take a look at and get the sense of how, at least at times, the therapy goes. The last part of the book I titled Skills, and this is really kind of the skills-based section. Like I was saying earlier, the book goes from more philosophical and abstract in the beginning to much more pragmatic and skills-based at the end. I dedicated a whole chapter to group facilitation just because so many people who work with probation-involved youth who are involved in the justice system, whether they do mindfulness or not, use the group as a medium for treatment just because it's economically it makes more sense. So people are running anger management groups, they're running substance abuse groups, and some people are even running mindfulness groups. So I dedicated a whole chapter to how I like to run groups, talking about issues that oftentimes come up in groups, talking about how to incorporate mindfulness into groups explicitly and also implicitly, that is, bringing in mindfulness on a process level and not really even having to call it mindfulness or meditation, but just implementing in such of a way that gets the group members to direct their awareness in certain ways. So there's a whole bunch of tips and tricks in that chapter, really, that any person who's running any type of group, but especially a group with adolescents and especially a group with at-risk adolescents, can gain from. The next chapter, it's another very skills-based chapter where I talk about the ways in which I view client interaction and behavior, whether that be in the group or in the one-on-one context. When people are talking, sometimes they may have certain body movements. They may be saying something out of their mouth that's inconsistent with the facial expression. These kind of like objective notifiers, I track these, and I kind of came up with a system somewhat loosely based on the foundations of mindfulness that helped me just kind of guide and track the client's objective behavior in front of me. And what I mean by objective behavior is, are they tapping their foot? Are they smacking their lips? Are they twiddling their fingers? I kind of use that system to track what's going on in the moment with them, and then potentially explore how that is or is not connected to whatever story they're bringing up in that moment. And then the last chapter, I titled it Teaching Mindfulness to High-Risk Adolescents. This is where I actually go in and talk about how to formally teach mindfulness meditation to young people. I really explicitly and on purpose put that chapter last. I wanted to kind of make a symbolic statement and say there's this whole movement in mindfulness has been very appropriated by our kind of Western commodifying ways. And there's all these certifications that are coming out, and people are doing these weekend workshops and then thinking, okay, I'm a mindfulness teacher now. So I really wanted to make a symbolic statement and say the actual teaching of formal meditation, although it can be, very powerful and a lot of transformation can come from that. When you're working with young people, there's so much more of a backstory first. There's so much more thick, rich material, such as resistance, such as the relationship, such as so much more that can be used, like you were saying, that can be used in such a way where if we give it attention, transformation may be able to occur. There's so much of that when you're working with people, let alone young people, that I just wanted to kind of, and I explicitly say this in the book, I just wanted to put this actual teaching part at the end, because I didn't want people to misunderstand and think, oh, okay, all you need to do is read this chapter and then you'll be able to actually teach the meditations. When you're working with young people, when you're working with, marginalized people in the system, there's so much more than just the actual teaching of the meditation. Like I said, it can be very powerful. I've had some extremely transformative experiences with young people in actual formal meditation, but I just wanted to symbolically put it at the end to suggest that there's so much more to the context that can be used to facilitate self-awareness. So in that chapter, I go through a lot of the things that I've been researching in my own original research, a lot of the things that are already out there in the literature. I'm not suggesting that there's some new form of meditation that works with young people. I think the method has been pretty well proven over the last 2,500 to 3,000 years. But I talk about the types of meditation that I've seen young people be attracted to, at least in the beginning. I talk about how much time might be a good time, talk about some informal activities as well. And then I have a full appendix after the last chapter with a bunch of just different activities from different organizations that I've worked with over the years. And that's the book. I mean, I do think this is one of those books where it's good to read it from cover to cover, but I also think if you're working with young people, it's a good book where you really could pick up the book and read one chapter and get something out of that chapter. That's what was my intention, at least.
The thing that I liked about the structure you described, Sam, in holding off the last part, the actual teaching of mindfulness, is that you really underscore the fact that there is a foundational fragility to the hardness that's often presented in at-risk youth or other people who are in challenging situations that requires a delicacy of handling to not only avoid causing further harm, but to enable them to unfold their lives in a more positive and meaningful direction.
Yes, I mean, that's absolutely right. When I train therapists or train my staff at MBA, there's so much in the interpersonal interaction. There's so much that the young person is bringing to the table as well because of their life experience that you really want to go in there with beginner's mind and not try to force meditation on somebody. Some people may not want to do it, and trying to force somebody to do something they don't want to do is oftentimes very unskillful. So I just wanted to highlight, like you're saying, I really wanted to highlight the idea that mindfulness is a way of life. That's one of my spiritual practices and something I believe. And, I have a tattoo on my arm that says life is the meditation. And in a sense, anything that arises in life for me is something that I can contemplate and be aware of and have a particular attitude towards. And that's how I try to train my staff at MBA and the therapists that I train as well, that there's so much that arises when you meet a young person, when you meet them in therapy or meet them in a group context or a classroom or whatever. And teaching them meditation is often just kind of the tip of the iceberg. Now, there's sometimes when a young person will really attach to the meditation and like it and want your guidance. And in those situations, it can become very powerful and transformative because they have agreed to kind of step into this vessel with you of learning something new, of learning the meditation that has a potential to transform, their lives. I was just teaching a mindfulness class in the juvenile hall with one of my co-facilitators last Wednesday, and we had a new group of kids in there, and there was a lot of energy in the room. We had about six youth in there with us. We were going into a new unit in the juvenile hall, so we didn't really know how it was going to be. And the 6 kids that walked into the room happened to be very strong leaders. And we had an amazing first group where we really talked about oppression and talked about how a lot of people from their communities get judged right off the back and, kind of judge a book by its cover kind of thing. So we had these deep conversations about oppression and how that was wrong and the kind of unskillfulness in that. And we all connected very much so. And at the end, I just led, I told them, since it was the first day of the class, I just said, we only got a couple of minutes left, and I'd really like to take you guys through a meditation, even though it's only a couple of minutes, because I think it's important. So we did that. We didn't even get a chance to process the meditation afterwards. The next week when they came back, this was actually 2 weeks ago. That's what I meant to say. The next week when they came back, which was this last Wednesday, most of the youth came up to me, my co-facilitator, and just said how that last 2 minutes, the conversations was beautiful, and we all connected, and that kind of, in a sense, created this vessel. And just in that last 2 minutes when we meditated the last week, they really felt an effect on that. And one of the kids pulled me to the side right after the group and was like, you know what, man, that meditation, it really helped me out. He said, I've been meditating for about 15 minutes every day in my room since we last met. And I was like, wow, man, that's great. And we just went on to do a meditation in that group, and you could just tell, there was no, sometimes when you're working with young people, there's a lot of fidgetiness, there's laughter, there's a lot of, kind of group management techniques that you can learn more about in chapter 7 of my book. There was none of that. This group was so there, and you can just tell that because we set the tone of meeting them where they were at, having the conversations that they thought were most important. We went to where the energy was. We created this vessel, this relationship in the inner subjective between ourselves as co-facilitators and the young people in the group. And then when we actually got to the meditation, which happened to only be 2 minutes, which is rare, we usually do more than 2 minutes, it had this profound effect on them. And it was all them. That wasn't something we did. I just led a very simple mindfulness of the breath meditation, and it was something that they took with them. And it was, those are the types of things that really warms my heart and gives me the chills in my body, because, when a young person sees that this is something powerful that they can take with them, it's not something they need always a teacher for, although I'm not saying it's bad to have meditation teachers. And it is something that's both an individual practice, but also a social practice, in the sense that we do this together and we think about each other and we send compassion to each other and so forth. So it was profound. It was a profound experience. And it just goes to show how sometimes the meditation itself can be very transformative. Sometimes the conversation and putting the right types of qualities into the awareness of the conversation that we have can be very transformative. And it's, the best case scenario is when that all happens in one group, which is what happened a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I appreciate your description of this practice as something we do. It's part of our life. It's not a technique we apply. And it's good to make that a very important distinction, that it's critical for the kids to be able to take this as something that they can do themselves, that they have that power, they have that choice to do, and it's a choice they can make that's meaningful to their lives in otherwise a life situation where they may not have a lot of choices, and that this is making choices in a better direction for them that they can do at any time. So, Sam, is the book intended only for those working with at-risk youth, or might it be of value to other mindfulness practitioners?
Yeah, I think the book can really be valuable to anyone. Like I think I was telling you in our last podcast, working with young people and young people in the probation system, it's something that I'm very passionate about. And to me, it's a spiritual practice. So when I write books and when I'm writing about this, I write through the lens of working with at-risk youth and, people marginalized by the system. All of the techniques, all of the concepts apply to not only people who work with adolescents that may not be considered at risk, but I believe they work with anyone, because it's, the undertone in the book is that this is about relationships. And, whether you're working with an adolescent trying to force change on them, or whether you're trying to get your significant other to change, there can be a lot of either skillfulness in that or unskillfulness in that. So I really believe it applies to anybody who works with anybody in kind of this human being capacity, but also can be applied to just life in general, although it's definitely written for more of the mentoring / counseling, psychotherapeutic profession, because that's where I'm coming from.
So how can people get the book?
If you go to my website, which is samhimelstein.com, that's the best way, I think, to get the book, because I have the book on there for about a 20% discount, because I get my author's discount, and I just want to do what I can to get the book out there. So if you go right there, right on the first page, you'll see a big graphic of the book, and you can click on that, or you can click on the tab that says books on my website, and you'll be able to order it directly from me, and I'd send it right out to you.
Excellent. So for folks who are listening to this episode, I will have a link to Sam's website, www.samhimelstein.com. And I will also have a graphic of the book, and that will take you right to Sam's site as well. To see more about Sam and his work, please do check that out. And our guest today has been Sam Himelstein. Sam, thanks for being with us on Present Moment.
Thanks so much, Ted.
Today's quote is from Sam Himelstein's new book, A Mindfulness-Based Approach to Working with High-Risk Adolescents. If a therapist chooses to teach mindfulness meditation directly to his or her client, e.g. to use mindfulness-based interventions, it is imperative that he or she have a personal meditation practice and be continually working toward a progression down a mindful path. A therapist who teaches outside the scope of personal experience does his or her clients a disservice in not being able to answer questions from experience, and will indubitably face challenges in guiding the client forward. Furthermore, the therapist's personal practice of mindfulness is one of the most important factors in successfully working with high-risk adolescents. In viewing therapist mindfulness as the harnessing of skills and qualities that sharpen therapists themselves, there are some particular qualities that develop during sustained mindfulness and self-awareness practices that are imperative to working with high-risk adolescents. Such qualities include authenticity, an intention toward human connection, and an authentic view on locus of control and behavioral change. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.